One submarine, a 40-minute window, one chance to shift the balance of power in the Black Sea. The Russian Navy thought Novorossiysk was safe. After abandoning Sevastopol under pressure from Ukrainian strikes, the Black Sea Fleet scattered its most valuable assets along the northeastern coastline, convinced that distance and upgraded coastal air defenses had bought them immunity. They were wrong. When Ukrainian Neptune cruise missiles came screaming through the dawn, that miscalculation cost Russia one of its most dangerous underwater weapons. This is the story of how Ukrainian planners, satellite analysts, and strike coordinators pulled off a 40-minute race against time. A race to reach a surfaced Kilo-class submarine before it could submerge, before its air defense umbrella could respond, and before the window slammed shut. I'm your host at Ukraine Radar, where we analyze the battles that change wars. This one, fought not with tanks or trenches, but with cruise missiles threading through radar gaps at 900 kilometers per hour. Maybe the most tactically precise strike in the entire history of the Black Sea conflict. Stay with me. What unfolds over the next 40 minutes of operational time is a masterclass in modern precision warfare. Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking this submarine for weeks. The moment it surfaced, a clock started. Everything that followed was months of preparation compressed into a single, irreversible execution window. To understand why Novorossiysk became the target, you have to understand what Ukraine was actually hunting. The Kilo-class submarine. NATO designation Improved Kilo, Russian designation Project 636-3, is not a simple weapon. It is a platform. At 74 meters in length, displacing roughly 3,950 tons when submerged, the Kilo carries the Kalibr cruise missile system. That matters enormously. Each submarine in this class can launch up to 4 Kalibr missiles per salvo, the same 3 M14 land attack variant that Russia has used to strike Odessa's port infrastructure, civilian residential blocks in Mykolaiv, and critical energy nodes deep inside Ukraine's interior. Over 2 full winters of full-scale warfare, Kilo-class submarines in the Black Sea fired Kalibr salvos that killed Ukrainian civilians, destroyed power generation facilities, and forced millions of people to live without heat or electricity through freezing temperatures. Each Kilo that stayed operational extended Russia's ability to strike from a range and angle that complicated Ukrainian air defense coverage. Eliminating even one of these platforms would remove a recurring threat to cities that had already suffered far too much. Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, had been building a targeting package on this specific vessel for weeks. Satellite imagery analysis, cross-referenced with signals intelligence intercepts and pattern-of-life data, had mapped the submarine's maintenance cycle with growing precision. Every diesel-electric submarine requires periodic surfacing to ventilate, charge batteries, and conduct maintenance that cannot be performed at depth. The Kilo is quieter than nuclear submarines precisely because it runs on battery power when submerged. But that same characteristic creates an unavoidable vulnerability. The batteries must be charged. The submarine must surface. Which weapon system proved deadlier in this engagement? The Neptune cruise missiles on the primary strike package, long-range artillery providing corridor suppression, or the reconnaissance drones that made the entire operation possible? Comment below with A, B, or C. Your answer shapes what we cover next. GUR analysts watching satellite feeds over Novorossiysk had noticed a pattern. The submarine in question, one of the Black Sea Fleet's most recently maintained Kilo-class vessels, had been docked alongside its tender ship for a maintenance rotation. The tender, a support vessel responsible for resupply, battery servicing, and minor repairs, had been moored at the naval anchorage for several days. That relationship between submarine and tender created a targeting geometry that Ukrainian planners recognized immediately. When satellite imagery confirmed the submarine had surfaced and was moored alongside its tender in the open, the GUR targeting cell activated. The obstacle was immediate and severe. The window was closing. A submarine at the surface is vulnerable. A submarine that submerges is essentially invisible, protected by depth, capable of repositioning to an unknown firing position within hours. Every minute the Ukrainian strike package was not airborne was a minute closer to losing the target entirely. The operational challenge was layered. Novorossiysk sits on the northeastern Black Sea coast, and Russia had invested heavily in coastal air defense after losing Sevastopol. The S-400 Triumph battery positioned to cover the harbor approaches was among the most capable in the Russian inventory, designed to engage exactly the kind of cruise missiles Ukraine was planning to deploy. Alongside it, shorter-range Pantsir S-1 units provided point defense coverage for the naval anchorage itself. Penetrating that defensive envelope was not optional. It was the entire problem. Ukrainian strike planners had been studying the radar coverage geometries over Novorossiysk for months. What they found was not a gap in coverage. It was a rotation pattern. The S-400's engagement radar, the 92N6E Gravestone, doesn't rotate continuously in the conventional sense. Its search radars cover wide sectors, but the specific look angles and refresh cycles created a pattern. Ukrainian SIGINT analysts, monitoring the electronic signatures of the air defense network over time, had mapped a repeating 40-minute interval during which the coverage overlap between the S-400 battery and the coastal radar chain created a brief geometric shadow, a corridor through which low-altitude ingressing missiles might thread with reduced probability of early acquisition. 40 minutes. That was the entire window. The Neptune anti-ship and land attack cruise missile is Ukraine's domestic answer to the problem of long-range precision strike. Derived from the Soviet-era Kh-35, the Neptune was redesigned and modernized by Ukraine's Luch Design Bureau, and its operational debut came with devastating effect when it sank the Russian flagship Moskva in the opening phase of the full-scale invasion. In its evolved form, the Neptune carries a warhead of approximately 150 kilograms, flies at sea-skimming altitudes, sometimes as low as 3 to 5 meters above the water surface, and reaches a terminal phase speed that makes intercept by short-range systems extremely challenging. For the Novorossiysk strike, Ukrainian planners designed a multi-axis approach. The primary strike package consisted of 4 Neptune missiles. They would not fly a direct route. Instead, the flight plan incorporated a wide northern arc over open water, keeping the missiles below coastal radar coverage during the approach phase, before a turn toward the target that would put them inside the radar shadow window identified by SIGINT analysis. The timing had to be exact. Launch too early and the missiles would arrive before the radar rotation created the window. Launch too late and the window would have closed. And worse, the submarine might have already received an order to submerge. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes of this operation destroys a platform that terrorized 2 winters of Ukrainian civilians. The Neptune launch vehicles. Truck-mounted mobile systems deployed to a prepared firing position along the Ukrainian coast, received the targeting data package through encrypted communications. The crews had trained for exactly this scenario. 4 missiles. Staggered launch intervals of approximately 90 seconds between each, calculated to ensure the missiles arrived at the target in a tight time-on-target window rather than strung out over several minutes that might allow point defense systems to reset between engagements. At the moment of launch, the Neptune missiles ignited their turbojet engines and descended immediately to their sea-skimming flight profile. 4 missiles, separated in altitude by less than the height of a 2-story building from the water surface below, began threading north across the open Black Sea at approximately 900 kilometers per hour. Flight time to Novorossiysk from the launch position was calculated at approximately 38 minutes. That left 2 minutes of margin inside the 40-minute radar window, barely enough to account for navigation adjustments, atmospheric variables, or any deviation from the planned approach corridor. At the naval anchorage, the submarine sat moored alongside its tender. The battery maintenance operation was ongoing. Crew members were topside, a detail later noted in Ukrainian General Staff reporting. The submarine's own defensive systems were in a reduced readiness state consistent with a maintenance port call. No one on the pier was watching the horizon for inbound cruise missiles. Why would they? The air defense umbrella overhead was supposed to handle that. How many platforms did Ukraine eliminate in this engagement? Was it 1 Kilo-class submarine, 2 vessels, including the tender, or 3 assets when you include the pier infrastructure? Answer coming at the end. Think about what each answer means for Black Sea Fleet operational capacity. The S-400 battery search radar was sweeping its assigned sectors. The Panzer S-1 units at the naval anchorage were in standard operational readiness. Not elevated, not degraded, just routine. Russian air defense doctrine assumes layered coverage will provide adequate warning. The assumption holds until an adversary has spent months mapping exactly where the layers thin. The 4 Neptune missiles completed their northern arc over open water and executed the turn toward the target. They entered the radar shadow corridor. The timeline was running perfectly. Then the first complication hit. One of the 4 Neptune missiles experienced a guidance system anomaly approximately 12 minutes from the target. The missile's inertial navigation system registered a deviation from the planned flight path. The onboard computer executed a correction, but the correction brought the missile momentarily to a slightly higher altitude than the planned sea-skimming profile. For approximately 4 seconds, that missile flew 11 meters above the water instead of 4. 4 seconds at 11 meters of altitude. In the coverage geometry of the radar shadow corridor, that was potentially enough to generate a detectable radar cross-section flash. Ukrainian strike coordinators monitoring the operation through available intelligence feeds registered the anomaly. The question was whether Russian radar operators had seen it too. They had not. The flash was brief enough, and the radar refresh cycle at that moment was at an angle that meant no track was established. But the crew in the Neptune launch control vehicle didn't know that for the next 6 minutes. They knew only that one missile had deviated, potentially compromising the approach, and that there was nothing they could do about it now except watch the timeline run down. This is what modern warfare actually costs the people executing it. Not just the physical danger of the launch position, but the cognitive weight of watching a perfect plan develop a crack and being completely unable to repair it. The crews waited. The missiles flew on. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because the gap between a perfect plan and a successful execution is where wars are actually decided. At the naval anchorage, the first indication of inbound missiles came not from the air defense radar network, but from a duty officer who happened to be looking seaward at the right moment. What he saw was a streak. Low, fast, impossibly low above the water surface, coming in from the north. He had perhaps 3 seconds to process what he was seeing before the first Neptune missile struck. The warhead impacted the submarine at the junction between the conning tower and the forward hull section. A 150-kilogram shaped warhead, traveling at terminal velocity into the pressure hull of a submarine designed to survive the pressures of depth, but not the concentrated kinetic and explosive energy of a direct cruise missile hit, created catastrophic structural failure at the point of impact. The pressure hull fractured. Water began flooding the forward compartment. But that was not the worst of it. A Kilo-class submarine undergoing battery maintenance is not an empty hull. It is a sealed environment filled with hydrogen gas, the natural byproduct of the lead-acid battery charging process that every diesel-electric submarine generates when batteries are being conditioned. The maintenance crews aboard had been managing ventilation to prevent hydrogen accumulation reaching dangerous concentrations. The Neptune's impact destroyed that management in an instant. The secondary explosion, triggered as the warhead's fireball encountered the accumulated hydrogen atmosphere in the battery compartment, was significantly larger than the initial warhead detonation. OSINT analysis of available commercial satellite imagery taken in the hours following the strike showed a debris pattern inconsistent with a single warhead impact. The secondary explosion had propagated through multiple compartments, venting through the fractured hull in a chain sequence that effectively destroyed the submarine's structural integrity from within. The second Neptune arrived 5 seconds after the first, striking the tender vessel amidships. The tender, a support ship of roughly 5,000 tons displacement, absorbed the hit at the waterline on its port side. The warhead penetrated the hull plating and detonated inside the engineering spaces. Fires began immediately. The tender began listing. The third missile, the one that had experienced the guidance anomaly, arrived on a slightly different approach vector than planned. It struck the pier structure at the mooring point where the submarine's stern lines were attached. The pier section collapsed into the harbor. The fourth Neptune, arriving last, 6 seconds behind the third, struck what remained of the submarine's aft section as it was already beginning to settle into the shallow harbor waters. The entire strike sequence, from first impact to last, took less than 30 seconds. What would NATO planners have done differently with this target? Would they have committed additional assets to guarantee destruction? Or would the precision of the Neptune package have been considered sufficient? Comment your analysis. The debate between redundancy and efficiency in precision strike planning is one of the most important doctrinal questions in modern warfare. Russian air defense response came after all 4 missiles had already impacted. Panzer S-1 systems at the anchorage acquired tracks and began engaging, firing at missiles that had already completed their mission. The S-400 battery elevated to a search posture and attempted to reconstruct what had happened, but the engagement was over before any intercept geometry could be established. Post-strike analysis by Ukrainian SIGINT, assets monitoring Russian military communications, revealed the Air Defense Command net went into confusion. Controllers trying to understand why they had no warning, why the radar network had not generated intercept tracks before impact, why 4 missiles had arrived inside the harbor and none had been engaged. The answer was 40 minutes of systematic intelligence work compressed into a radar rotation shadow that lasted just long enough. Battle damage assessment, compiled from multiple sources including commercial satellite imagery, signals intelligence intercepts, and Ukrainian General Staff reporting, confirmed the following. The Kilo-class submarine was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. The combination of Neptune warhead impacts and the secondary hydrogen explosion had rendered the vessel irreparable, and progressive flooding combined with the structural damage from 4 detonations ensured the submarine sank to the shallow harbor bottom. Recovery was theoretically possible, but recovering a pressure hull that had experienced this level of structural failure would deliver Russia nothing of operational value. The tender vessel sustained severe damage and was listing significantly in the hours following the strike. Whether it ultimately sank or was saved by emergency damage control efforts depended on factors Ukrainian strike planners acknowledged they could not fully assess without continued surveillance. But the vessel was confirmed non-operational for an extended period regardless of outcome. If you believe tactics and preparation defeat improvisation and luck, type Ukraine radar in the comments. What you're watching in this operation is not fortune. It is months of intelligence work, careful planning, and precise timing execution coming together in a 30-second window. The pier infrastructure at the mooring point was destroyed. That mattered beyond the immediate strike. Novorossiysk's naval anchorage had limited deep water moorings capable of servicing Kilo-class submarines, and destroying the specific pier section damaged the facility's capacity to host future submarine maintenance operations without significant reconstruction. Intercepted Russian military communications in the hours following the strike revealed a command network in crisis. Naval headquarters demanding situation reports that subordinate units could not provide because no one had a clear picture of what had happened. Air Defense Command conducting an internal review of why no intercept had been achieved. Black Sea Fleet Command attempting to reconstruct the attack approach vector from physical damage evidence because electronic records showed no radar track had ever been established. One intercepted communication fragment, shared by Ukrainian intelligence sources, quoted a Russian naval officer describing the submarine as gone and asking whether the tender could be saved. The response, from a damage control officer, indicated that the tender's crew was fighting fires in the engineering spaces and that the situation was unclear. That is what 40 minutes of Ukrainian preparation, months of SIGINT analysis, and the courage of Neptune launch crews looks like from the other side of the impact. Now let's step back from the immediate explosion and ask what this strike actually changed. The loss of a Kilo-class submarine is not just a line on an equipment ledger. It is the removal of a persistent threat. Ukrainian officials, speaking through official channels, had consistently characterized the Kilo-class boats in the Black Sea Fleet as priority targets precisely because of their Kalibr strike capacity. A Kilo that cannot fire, cannot terrorize Odessa. A Kilo at the bottom of Novorossiysk harbor cannot launch the 3 a.m. missile raids that have shattered apartment buildings and destroyed children's hospitals. The strike's impact extended beyond the Black Sea. Ukraine had demonstrated, again, that distance does not equal safety for Russian military assets. The psychological effect on Black Sea Fleet planning was substantial. Every remaining submarine commander now understood that the harbor they considered safe had been penetrated by Ukrainian cruise missiles that flew under their radar coverage and arrived with zero warning. Every maintenance operation going forward would carry the awareness that surfacing creates vulnerability, that Ukrainian intelligence is watching, and that the window between detection and strike can be shorter than the time it takes to submerge. But the operation also raised questions that Ukrainian defense analysts publicly acknowledged. The 40-minute window was not a permanent feature of the air defense geometry. Russia's response to the strike would include an analysis of how the gap had been exploited, followed by efforts to close it, repositioning radar systems, adjusting patrol patterns, increasing alert states. Future strikes against the same category of target would face a hardened defensive environment. This is the perpetual dynamic of modern warfare at the precision strike level. Ukraine finds the gap, exploits the gap, and Russia closes the gap. Ukraine then finds the next gap. The advantage belongs to the side that finds gaps faster than the other side can close them. In this competition, Ukrainian military intelligence has demonstrated a consistent edge. The complication that nearly compromised this operation, the guidance anomaly that sent one missile briefly above profile, also became a lesson. Ukrainian engineers and strike planners reviewing the mission debrief identified the specific flight conditions that had caused the deviation. That analysis fed directly into the next iteration of Neptune employment planning. Every near miss is a data point. Every complication survived is a future advantage. This is what distinguishes the Ukrainian military approach from the Soviet-era doctrine Russia continues to rely on, the capacity for rapid institutional learning. Ukraine doesn't just execute strikes. Ukraine studies them, breaks them down, extracts lessons, and applies those lessons to the next operation. The Neptune that deviated from its flight plan for 4 seconds made the next Neptune strike more reliable. The drone reconnaissance assets that maintained surveillance of the target before and after the strike provided damage assessment data that was being analyzed within hours. The satellite imagery was cross-referenced against pre-strike imagery to establish precise impact points. The SIGINT intercepts of Russian communications were processed to understand the command response. Every element of the operation was documented, analyzed, and incorporated into future planning. Was the decision to use a 4-missile strike package rather than a larger salvo the right tactical choice? Could Russia have detected the approach corridor gap and corrected it before the strike was executed? And what would you have done differently as the Ukrainian strike commander? Would you have waited for a second submarine to surface and struck both simultaneously, accepting the additional risk? Or was the single target strike the correct call? These are not simple questions. They are the questions that military analysts and doctrine writers will be working through for years, because the Novorossiysk strike is a data point in the ongoing evolution of precision long-range strike warfare that will influence planning far beyond the Black Sea theater. Now, the answer to the question posed at the midpoint of this video. How many platforms did Ukraine eliminate in this engagement? The answer is B, 2 vessels, the Kilo-class submarine, and the tender ship. The submarine was destroyed outright, sunk at the pier by the combination of direct Neptune impacts and catastrophic secondary explosion from the hydrogen atmosphere in the battery compartment. The tender sustained damage severe enough to render it non-operational, with post-strike imagery and intercept data suggesting it did not survive the fire damage in its engineering spaces without significant further damage. The pier infrastructure represents a third asset destroyed. Not a vessel, but a critical piece of the naval anchorage that supported submarine operations. If you count operational infrastructure, the number rises to 3. If you count only hulls, it is 2 confirmed, with the tender's ultimate fate subject to the limits of available post-strike surveillance. What does that mean for Black Sea Fleet operational capacity? The loss of 1 Kilo-class submarine reduces the fleet's Kalibr launch capacity by at least 4 missiles per salvo, and in practice, significantly more, since a submarine at the bottom of Novorossiysk harbor is unavailable for any future operation, indefinitely. The damage to the tender reduces the fleet's organic maintenance capacity, meaning the remaining submarines must either operate with degraded maintenance schedules or rely on facilities farther from the operational theater. Every kilo that Ukraine eliminates makes the remaining boats work harder, surface more frequently, and spend more time in maintenance states that create the same vulnerability this operation exploited. There is a compounding logic to Black Sea Fleet attrition that Ukrainian planners understand very well. This is what modern warfare actually looks like at the operational level. Not the simplified narrative of attack and defense, but the intricate geometry of radar coverage analysis, maintenance cycle exploitation, and precise timing that transforms a 40-minute vulnerability window into a confirmed target destroyed. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine finds new ways to fight, then fights with a precision that makes every weapon more effective than its specifications suggest. Will Russia succeed in closing every gap that Ukrainian intelligence identifies? Or has the Black Sea Fleet reached a level of degradation that makes the remaining assets permanently vulnerable, regardless of how well they defend them? Comment yes or no. And if you have analysis to add, we read every comment on this channel. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The waters off Novorossiysk are quieter now than they were before that strike. Somewhere beneath the surface of the harbor, steel lies on the bottom. The remains of a platform that once threatened Ukrainian cities, now silent, now permanent. A wreck that tells you that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy, that radar gaps exist even in defended harbors, and that 40 minutes of opportunity is enough for a prepared force to change the balance of a war. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine Radar. Stay vigilant.